Grand rising to you. Thank you so much for staying with us here on CVMTV. It's sunrise. It's now time for another Law and Order JA. And the question sent in to us today reads as follows. Sophia has worked as a marketing manager at Media Max for 5 years without prior consultation. Without prior consultation, her employer significantly reduces her salary by 25% due to budget constraints, and she was also moved to a different office further from home. Sophia, becoming frustrated with the changes made by her employer, resigned from Media Max. Can she make any claims against Media Max? Well, to ventilate these issues, this morning we have with us attorney at law and partner at Duncox, Paulette Neal, to discuss constructive dismissal and what are your rights and what do they really look like on the job. So let's get into it. Good morning, counsel. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thanks.
Very well. Sophia is in a little spot of bother here.
Certainly.
And this sounds very familiar. You know, like a lot of people can relate to this particular situation. So what can you tell us about it?
Sure. So this situation particularly forms or falls in the area of law known as constructive dismissal. And Sophia can in fact make, or she has strong grounds to make a claim against Media Max for constructive dismissal.
Well, somebody would say, but hold on, counsel, wait there. That sounds like an oxymoron, constructive dismissal.
Yes.
How do the two combine?
All right, so constructive dismissal occurs where the employee terminates a contract of employment, whether with or without notice, in direct response to the employer's conduct, which when objectively viewed, it's due to a fundamental or a breach of a fundamental term in the contract of employment, or it could be a unilateral change in the terms of the contract by the employer.
So when the employer frustrates, for want of a better word, the employee and into resigning, making it look like, oh, it's you resign, but no, it's actually because of your actions that caused the resignation. All right, so talk to us about Sophia's, course of redress.
Right, so in order to prove this constructive dismissal, there are 4 elements that Sophia must prove, right? So first, there has to be a breach of the contract by the employer.
Right.
Secondly, this breach of contract must be sufficient to justify Sophia resigning. In this particular case, the employer unilaterally reduced salary.
Right, 25%.
Right,
That's a lot.
right, exactly.
Yes.
The employer also relocated Sophia.
Yes.
So the changes made by the employer has to justify the employee resigning. Thirdly, the employee must leave his job in direct response to the breach of contract, and the employee must act swiftly in terminating the contract and making a claim for constructive dismissal.
But I can probably hear an employer saying, but counsel, I can send my employee to a different office if I want. I can just cut their pay if I want. I mean, what's the big deal? I mean, she works at the Halfway Tree office, but I need more people in the Oche office. So she's employed to me, so why can't I just move her? Right.
So there is an implied term in a contract of employment of trust and confidence.
Yes.
The employee must be able to rely on those terms. So for example, if the contract doesn't allow for, or it doesn't provide for a mobility clause for the employer to move the worker, then the employer could not unilaterally change the employer, relocate the employee rather.
Yes, because that has implications.
Exactly. Exactly. And it would be in breach of the terms of the contract.
Very well. So if the employee can make out those 4 tenets of what you just listed, what is the next step?
Well, they can make a claim for constructive dismissal. Once you follow those 4 steps and the employee resigns in direct response to the conduct of the employer, then Sophia, in this case, could definitely make a claim.
Do they have to meet all 4 prongs?
Yes.
Okay, very well.
Yes.
And so what does a case like this now? Because sometimes, in Jamaica, say, boy, it don't make no sense here, man. It's going to take too long. And probably the damages at the end will not be worth it. So what kind of damages are we looking at?
Right.
If Sophia should be successful in a suit?
Okay, so compensation typically looks at, so if, for example, you go to the court or the tribunal, it takes some time in Jamaica. It could take you, say, 2 years, for example, for a matter to be heard at Industrial Disputes Tribunal. So in terms of damages...
I was about to ask that, right? So do we go to court or IDT?
For constructive dismissal, it could be both, either court or the IDT.
Okay.
Right. So in terms of damages, you look at from the time where the contract was breached and the employee resigned up to the date of the award.
Okay, very well.
Yes.
Are there certain steps in terms of protocol that the employee should follow so that he or she, in this case Sophia, protects herself? So for example, speaking to HR, maybe you'd have written a letter to have that on your record, to do certain things, to say, okay, you never just resigned, I actually tried, I got nowhere, and so therefore resignation was my final option, because I've tried to seek redress and I'm not getting anywhere. Right. Instead of just blatantly resigning like that.
Well, you could, and I would recommend that, you know, if an employer makes a unilateral change in your contract, I would recommend that you speak to the employer, see if they could make the change. But if they don't make the change, then you possibly could have a claim in constructive dismissal. However, if the employee does not, for example, go to HR, that would not prevent the employee from making a claim. Because once the employer breaches the contract, a fundamental term in the contract of employment, then that could give the employee some rights to make a claim.
So in this case, Sophia Paulette, does she need to go to any specific lawyer? Because I know persons sometimes will, you know, wonder, so Miss Kitty, like, oh, you know, you go to a gynecologist for gynecological issues, a cardiologist for heart issues. Is there like a specific lawyer, or is it that you can find any attorney and you can go to them?
Well, this is an employment matter, so I'd recommend that you go to an attorney that practices employment law.
Okay, very well. Okay, so Sophia, that's a question that you can ask or should ask, you know, employment law. Do you practice employment law? Do you have any other word of advice for Sophia in this particular instance?
Well, if you find yourself in this particular situation or a similar situation to Sophia, I would recommend that before you resign, seek counsel, because in my opinion, the threshold for proving constructive dismissal is high. So get some advice before you resign from your job and try to seek compensation. All
right, thank you so very much. Be proactive, not reactive. That was Paulette Neal, attorney at law and partner at Duncox, giving us the legal lowdown on all things labor law. It's time for another break, and there's much more Sunrise right after this break.